This time round, it's going to be on health and safety and working as a science technician. I'm going to start straight away. I think we're going to probably use the whole of an hour and a half. And as Gary said, please do any questions and that you may have in the Q&A. So what we'll cover today: your responsibilities as a science technician, plus those of your employer and colleagues, the difference between risk and hazards for safe lab environment, when and how to conduct a thorough risk assessment, and something new which we haven't covered before actually, and it's really important, is implement and secure your chemicals in education for proper chemical management and security, which we will cover in detail towards the second part of the session. So, who is responsible for health and safety? As we all know, the health and safety at work places overall responsibility for health and safety within the employer. And what is their duty? Their duty is to provide a healthy and safe working conditions for employees and others, information and training concerning health and safety, a health and safety policy for the whole school. And it'll be interesting to put in the Q&A, how many of you have actually seen or aware of your school's health and safety policy, and perhaps the science department's approved code of practice? So the technician's duty then: follow training you have received when using any organ items your employer has given you. We need to take reasonable care of our own and others with regards to health and safety, cooperate with the employer on health and safety, and we need to tell someone, our employer, supervisor, manager, or a health and safety representative, if you think the work or inadequate precautions are putting anyone's health and safety at a serious risk. I'm sure this is all standard stuff that you have all come across at some stage, and now we're going to move over to the science laboratories and prep rooms. Can be hazardous areas, but they are relatively safe places to work, provided due care is taken and good working practices are followed. And then leads into what is a hazard. And I know we haven't got the chart, but do please put in the Q&A and ask a statement rather than a question. What is a hazard? Just going to wait a few minutes for people just to put, just out of interest. I know it's very basic, but let's do that. If you can just, and then we can see what, yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, Chris, but I was just going to say, if anyone's answering your questions, it's better they put it in the chat box, so we just go just their questions in the Q&A that we can put to you.
Fine, absolutely fine, Gary. Thank you. So, what is a hazard? For those that, a hazard is anything with a potential to cause harm, for example, some chemicals or electricity at high voltage. So we have the hazard. Then we have the risk. And what is a risk? Again, I'm just going to pause just a few seconds, give people the chance to put something in the chat. So the risk is the likelihood of harm because. So we have the hazard, the risk, and now we have the control measure. What is a control measure? Control measure is an action that can be carried out to reduce the risk. And it's important to note there that we're saying, I mean, it would be fantastic if we can eliminate the risk, but very often we can't eliminate the risk. We can't get rid of the risk altogether. Therefore, we try and reduce it to what we call an acceptable level. And one of those examples, it will be, we use a less concentrated solution if we can. So it's always best to use the least concentrated solution of any chemical that the activity will work, rather than use a more higher concentration, which could be more hazardous, but also more expensive because it uses more chemicals, and then it reduces the disposal of chemicals also. So let's look at some control measures. In most cases, appropriate training in safe working practices will considerably reduce the risk, even though the hazard still exists. Sometimes we can't get rid of the hazard, but as we said earlier, we can reduce it. And one example of that is when we dilute in concentrated acids, always add acid to water very slowly, no water to acid. Often the appropriate training has been shown how to do something by an experienced person. Now, I find that it's something really useful to be shown something rather than just reading it. I think it's, the visual impact of seeing something being done, it cannot be replaced. That's why apprentices, training people, they pick up really good skills in that way. Other control measures include wearing safety goggles when appropriate, of course, using the correct equipment or tools to do their job, ensuring adequate ventilation when necessary. For example, if few companies, for some cases, just opening the window will be sufficient, and displaying appropriate warning signs and labels and giving verbal written warnings with instructions. So again, it's quite important. I'm a great believer actually labeling chemicals correctly, using printed methods, label printer if you can, clearly label bottles and actually have the correct warning signs, the correct pictograms there, because then it indicates the hazard of a chemical, and people do take, again, is the visual impact of looking at the bottle that it's got a hazard label on it, that, hold on, I need to be careful with that. Then we come around how we assess the risk. And in my opinion, there are two factors to be considered here when assessing the size of the risk. The first is the chance of something going wrong. And the second is the seriousness of the potential of harm if something does go wrong. And working this out is what we call, of course, a risk assessment. And the tables in the next slide give some guidance on how to do this, given that the risk is a probability multiplied by the seriousness. And if we look at one of my tables, and there's a couple of which I'm going to show you today. So we have the probability of a problem arising, that it could be low, medium, and high on this slide, going down the table. And then on the horizontal side, we have how serious of a problem if it does arise. And then on the right-hand side, I actually got some actions to be taken. For example, if we look at something with a low probability and the seriousness is low, dissolving salt in water, very low, fairly safe. But then if we look at the other extreme side here, where we have the probability being high, but also the seriousness of a problem arising being high, the problem is then very likely, and it could be, the result could be serious when we dilute hydrochloric acid without having the training. So we look at the probability, as in the previous slides, multiplied by the seriousness, and we work out the risk assessment. And here indicates the level of the risk with the action and time scale. So when we looked at the low risk levels, monitoring is necessary to make sure we still monitor it, even if it's low, to make sure and to ensure that the current controls remain effective. We always review our risk assessments. And I will talk a little bit more about the review as we in the next few slides. So when we look at the medium, you must try to reduce the risk, but should carefully measure the cost of prevention. You should use measures to reduce the risk with defined time period. And if the medium risk associated with extremely harmful consequences, you might need to carry out another assessment to identify precisely what the likelihood will be. And then we have, you know, in the high impact of risk, you should not start work until the risk has been reduced. You may have to set aside considerable resources to do this. And this is where we kind of have to make a decision. Is it worthwhile doing? So you need to look at what the impact will be. Another table which is more commonly used nowadays by health and safety personnel, it's used in the numbering system, which is the serious, very similar to the previous one, but instead of highlighting low, this one here, low, medium, and high, we give numbers, and sometimes it's a little bit, you know, what does low mean or what does medium? I prefer sometimes to use numbers. So something that's improbable is 1, and severity is 1, and you multiply 1 by 1, you get 1, and therefore you know that's, you know, fairly safe to do. And then you go into then minor, medium, major, and then we have fatal. And I think when we're in the red zone here, we need to consider quite carefully if we should be doing that activity. But anything in the green area, you know, and in the orange one, we must really look at our risk assessments carefully for the activity. I started using that template, and I used to have my risk assessments as low, medium, and high, but I'm now using the number system, which I think a little bit more precise of what we need to do. So let's look at some risk assessment. Before undertaking an activity, as part of work, an employee must consult relevant model risk assessments. And we adjust or adapt the outcomes of the model risk assessment to meet the needs of the individual circumstances. So the risk assessment describes a process and an outcome. I just wanted to emphasize here a couple of statements. It's that we consult model risk assessments. And what are these model risk assessments? We know that CLIAPS provides model risk assessments. And with these are just for consultation, because they do not replace your own risk assessment for your own activity as a technician or the teacher's activity in a class. And I've always been asked in considerable discussions, and I'm sure I'm going to see lots of info on this in the chat or the Q&A, should technicians be doing risk assessments for teachers? And myself and CLIAP's opinions is that no, the teacher should be doing their own risk assessments. We can support them in doing that, but it's their own responsibility. Teachers are in charge of the class and they carry their own risk assessments. The reason is the ones They know the ability of the students they teach, and each lesson may be in a different lab, and therefore we need to consider the facilities of each lab and the size of the group before we can actually do a proper risk assessment. And coming to that, the risk assessment is a thinking process. We consider the implications, and this might include trialing a procedure out, and it's something that I'm really fond of. As often as I can, if it's a new activity, I will trial it out, make sure it works, it's safe, then I will give it out to the class. And therefore, when we trial that, we can actually proceed to produce the written record. And this record is for both for communicating what the thinking process is and looking at the model risk assessments and recording the outcomes. So identifying the hazards. Where do we get the information from? Said earlier, from warning signs, of course, and symbols, general knowledge. What do I mean by general knowledge? How can I do? It's basically, as an experienced science technician, you know that, let's take sulfuric acid or corn hydrochloric acid. We know they are corrosive, and therefore, that's the general knowledge. Then we refer to model risk assessments, which could be the CLIAPS model risk assessment, it would be the CLIAPS HAS code, or it could be the materials safety data sheet supplied by SLS or other suppliers. And also knowing the persons involved, which is what I mentioned before. So if a teacher is doing the risk assessments, they know their class, they know the lab, the environment which they will be working in, and includes the time pressure. Very often is something that we forget to take into account. If you are doing an activity that requires an hour to do, trying to fit that in 45 minutes lesson, you'll be rushing and probably not taking the correct precautions and doing the activity safely. Then we need to assess the risk. How likely is the procedure could go wrong, and how serious it will be. And we reduce the risk by adopting the control measures that we mentioned before. It's a requirement to reduce all risk to those as low as possible, which still allows the desired end to be achieved. For example, avoid the process altogether and cover in theory. Is that occasionally that will be possible. It fits the object of practical activities. We can easily substitute a safer substance or segregate users from the event, use person protective equipment or other measures. And what do we need to record? CLIAPS believes that significant findings of any risk assessment procedures are best recorded on documents in daily use, such as a scheme of work, a lesson plan, worksheets, or technician's notes. So we record on our scheme of work the significant points of the model risk assessment. So we refer to model risk assessments, and then we annotate. We don't just say see HAS code. For example, 0.5 mole sulfuric acid is written. C has a 98. That doesn't mean much. we need to inform the pupils about the information on the HAS card. Today, we are using 0.5 mol H2SO4, sulfuric acid. It's irritant, therefore make sure you wear your safety glasses. We need to emphasize, we need to inform students. A risk assessment is no good if it sits in a filing cabinet or in a folder on a computer, or it's on your desk. You've done this beautiful risk assessment and you've got it with you, but you don't inform the students. Then if something goes wrong, you're liable. The purpose of the risk assessment is for us to assess the activity and inform the users accordingly. I hope that's okay. That's all I'm going to cover today about risk assessments, but do put in the chat or any questions that you may have, and we try and cover those at that end. It's coming now down to the second part of today's, and I think time-wise we're doing well. We just had about half an hour, so this should take roughly the same time. So,
sorry, I thought just before you start your second section,
yeah.
I meted a lot of people late, so I just want to go over it again. If you do have any specific questions, please put it in the Q&A section and we'll make sure you definitely get an answer. If you can't hear me, this isn't going to help, but you can turn on live captions. I've just put a message about that in the chat as well. I think you've answered a lot of the questions as you've been talking, Chris, because I've been trying to keep a track of it. It was about who has to write the risk assessment, teacher or technician, and a few other bits, but I'll let you carry on and we'll come to that at the end.
Actually, Gary, since we're going to the second part, if there are anything specific to risk assessment, I'm happy to answer them now. If you got any Q&As that haven't been covered.
Who does the risk assessments and where are they kept?
Okay. I think I kind of covered that.
That's what I mean. I think you had covered that one.
Well, I just wanted to sort of make this clear. Technicians do their own risk assessments, but the employer provides model risk assessments. And very often you'll say, where would I find the employer's model risk assessment? Well, what the employer does, it joins the CLIAPS membership and tells you, go onto the CLIAPS website, download the model risk assessments and use those for your own activity. And as we said, we don't go onto the CLIAPS website, download the HAS card and think that we have done a risk assessment. CLIAPS HAS card has got the information about the particular chemical or sometimes the particular activities in some of their activity sheets, but it is not the full risk assessments because they don't know the environment that you're working, that your prep room or lab has a fume cover, for example. The other things that we need to consider when we are writing a risk assessment. So a technician will do a risk assessment for their own activity. And in my opinion, a teacher, as I said earlier, is responsible for the class they teach, and they should be doing their own risk assessments. Technicians should not be doing the risk assessment for teachers because the emphasis is that they do not know the class. They don't know how the behavior of the class. Sometimes they don't know the size of the class, and you may know the lab and what the facilities are in the lab. But the important thing, as I said, is the level of the students, the ability of the students, the behavior of the students. We don't know, and therefore it's the responsibility of the teacher to do the risk assessment. We can
generally, I guess they wouldn't be in the room either. So another reason why it needs to be the teacher that does it.
Absolutely, and the teacher needs to understand the risk assessment as well. And therefore, if we do them and they think, "Oh, I've got a risk assessment," and they don't consult with that risk assessment, then they won't be carrying that activity safely. So,
does a technician, Chris, have the right to stop a practical if they think it's unsafe, or they can't really do that? It's purely down to the teacher.
Yeah, I have been asked that before. Look, if you can see, I wouldn't go in front of the class and say stop. I would go to the teacher and say, look, I think this is not safe. You know, a quiet word to the teacher's ear. I think it's more professional than trying to sort of make the teacher look an idiot in front of the
Yeah,
class.
I thought that'd be the answer.
That would be my answer. You know, okay, if you're an experienced technician, you've been there and you know the member of staff, it's a tricky thing, isn't it? If you know the member of staff and you think they wouldn't mind, then yes, you can go ahead and do that.
Mm.
But it's a tricky one to do. And I think we need to be professionals. That's the
Yeah,
important thing.
that makes sense. I mean, obviously, you wouldn't go and stop the head of science from doing something, but if it's a brand new teacher and you've been working at the school for 10 years, you might think I need to tell this person not to do it this way.
Absolutely, absolutely,
That
absolutely.
makes sense.
Especially if it's something that it could be a serious issue, then I will go in and definitely stop that because we don't want anything that, um, it have a serious impact or a serious accident. I hope it clarifies that. I'm a strong believer. Yes, we support the teachers. We can give them a copy of the CLIAP has code so the teachers can use that to do the model risk assessment. You can write a model risk assessment, but emphasize to the teacher, this is a model risk assessment that you should adapt for your own class.
I think that's good advice. I'll turn my camera off and let you carry on with the content, Chris.
That's fine. Okay, we are moving on to sort of something that has been produced for a while ago, and not many people talk about it. And I think it's really important. It's the Secure Your Chemicals in Education, which has been produced by the Home Office. And the Home Office approached the Health and Safety Executive, CLIAPS, and their Scottish counterparts to write this document. And the aim was to improve the security of hazardous chemicals that are used in schools, mainly secondary and tertiary education, and to prevent them from being used to make illegal substances such explosives or narcotics. And this came out at the time of the Terrorism Acts. And so it's been a while, it's been around, but it's not talked as much now. But I think it's really important document that every technician should be aware of. So, and again, similarly to the health and safety, the health and safety the work 1974 is the responsibility of the management at any site that holds hazardous chemicals for whatever reason in education is for actually doing practical activities that they are purchased, stored, and disposed in a safe, secure manner. So this Secure Your Chemicals code is designed to simplify the procedure. It's not trying to put any kind of extra work on us or the employer. And it's about the purchase, the storage, the use, and disposal. So who is accountable for chemicals? So we need to ask a question, can you tell if anything has gone missing? So if you cannot, you need to use the guidance. There's a guidance that follows this guidance that we will look at later on. So you need to assess your procedures and take appropriate action to ensure that you can answer yes. Yes, I'm accountable for the chemicals. I can account for any chemicals that go missing. Identifying the risk, the security of these chemicals that you hold on sites. It's not always a function of your own, because some external factors. If, for example, you have built-in works within the school grounds, unknown people having access to the school buildings, so And even the media put ideas into students, and therefore, if they see in a program about chemicals, they may say, "Oh, that we know where they are kept. They're kept in the prep room." It's that kind of thing. Therefore, the questions we need to ask: can you store the chemicals in secure storage and restricted access? How good are your physical security measures? Have you had any incidents which resulted in failure in the security of chemicals? Have you had anything been stolen, any missing chemicals? And the things we need to consider: who enters your prep room if you haven't got a separate chemical store? And you store the majority of your chemicals, and we know that some chemicals are stored in the prep rooms, regardless of if we have a separate chemical store. We do store everyday chemicals, although they might not be the chemicals, the high risk chemicals that are on this list. We do store chemicals. So who has access to the prep room? Do the teachers send students into the prep room, or do the teachers use the prep room for their lunch and things like that? And we know that happens. So, do you maintain an audit of chemicals? And we look at the list at the end of this document. So, we looked at identifying the risk. Where is it? Storage. Hazardous chemicals held in store must be carefully monitored. And again, the question we need to ask: is there a full stock list available, or have you what you have and where it is held? Can you isolate them in a stock and lock it away until it's needed? For example, do you have a proper chemical store, or do you lock your prep room where you have prepared your class practical? Or when you actually prepare a practical and there are some chemicals and you put them in the lab in advance, is that lab then kept locked? Do teachers go in and then leave the door unlocked? It's the kind of things that we need to consider. Now, a full stock list, it could be computerized, it could be some report from our chemical stock list, but it could be even a written list. But you must have a list of all. It's the legal requirement to have a list of all your chemicals. It doesn't have to be computerized, but you must have a list. And when chemicals are removed from storage for use, it becomes more important to know how much has been removed and that the amount removed has been used or returned. So, do you use lessons requisition sheets so you can prove these chemicals have been put out? For example, if a chemical is gone missing, can you provide proof where it's gone? And then again, the importance of maintaining a full stock list. And are the labs at the end of the day or at the end of the lesson being checked for any chemicals left behind? And who uses hazardous chemicals, and are the teachers trained to use these hazardous chemicals? Then we need to be able to identify the hazardous substances, something that maybe appear harmless to some users could be a significant hazard to others, especially if it becomes more dangerous when mixed with the other substances. And it's one of the things that's why I don't like putting a hazard card out with a chemical, because normally the hazard card, it gives information about a particular chemical, but then the activity, and that's why the risk assessment is for an activity, not for a chemical itself. When we mix two chemicals together, we get a byproduct. And we need to know what the byproduct, and that's what the risk assessment should refer to, what the activity does and what those byproducts that they are produced.
I have a couple of chemical questions I can put your way while we're on the topic, Chris. Someone recently had a H&S audit, and the inspector suggested they should keep hazard cards in the chemical store, even though it's just a store and they don't actually handle the chemicals in there. Is that good advice or unnecessary, would you say?
If we look at the advice that Clear says, refer to the website for the latest hash card. It's because if you print a hash card and you put in your camp store, it could be an update that's done online that is not on the hash card that you have in your store. So Clear's recommendation is refer to the online versions because they don't produce hard copies of the Clear's hash cards.
But I mean, you wouldn't specifically need them in the chemical store, would you? You just need them
No,
available in the prep room.
I
Yeah,
don't
that's
see
what I
the
thought.
purpose of
Yeah.
the hash cards being in the store. When you go into your chemical store, you pick a chemical app. Before you use it, then refer to the Clear hash card.
Everyone I know, I think, just has it somewhere available in the prep room. I don't know anyone that keeps it in the store.
Yeah.
Another question, is there a maximum safe limit of certain acids or chemicals to be stored in a department? As in, can you have too much, I don't know, conc hydrochloric acid or too much of something, or there's no real limits?
There is no real limits if you can justify your using them. And really, you need to do an audit, a regular audit of your chemicals, how much, and again, just plugging in my software here a little bit. One of the things they do, you can see how much of each chemical you have used each year. For example, you should review your chemical use. I try to use to keep my chemicals to the lowest levels that I can. There is no need to keep large quantities if you don't need them. Now, for acids, there isn't a limit. If you can justify that you need 10 liters of acid a year or 20 or whatever you need and you use it, that's fine. You need that because you're a very large department. It's a department that has lots of practicals. You need that chemical, that's absolutely fine. But try and keep it to the least quantities that you require. I always find it is much safer. The other thing, though, there is a limit on the flammables that you can keep inside a chemical store, and that's 50 liters. For flammables, there is a limit in an internal chemical store. That's why often large schools have external stores, external flammable cabinets where they store excessive amounts. Yes, Gary, sorry.
No, I was going to say that. I just saw that come in the chat, and I wondered if the size of your store would change the amount you're allowed to keep.
No.
No, okay.
An internal store can only keep 50 liters of flammable liquids.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
Yep, carry on, please.
Okay. And, well, funny enough, next slide, quantity on site. So it's important to know how much of each chemical you have on your site. So refer to Clear's guidance and what you should consider, how much of any one chemical do you have on site at any one time, how often you conduct a stock check. Such checks include formal checks and informal ones done on a daily basis as chemicals are applied for and used in lessons. Could you reduce the quantities held or use less hazardous alternatives? And it's what I just said, Gary. Try and keep everything to the minimum. There is no point of, I know I've been a technician now. I did say over 40 years, actually coming up to 48 years, if you believe it or not. I started at 17. And at the time when we started trying to place an order for the chemicals, it was all paper-based. You give a copy to the secretary, which will send it by post to the supplier, and then, it will get delivered. That took a period of 2-3 weeks before you get any chemicals. Nowadays, you can go on the phone to the SLS team, you can get the chemical delivered tomorrow. So that's the difference. That's why I keep saying keep your chemicals to the minimum, because we can get deliveries pretty quickly.
Something that's come into the Q&A section.
Yep.
This. What procedures should be in place, in your opinion and experience, for receiving and delivering chemicals, especially those on the SYC list, i.e. from delivery to the school site until the package can be opened, logged, labelled and stored by technicians? This person's in the process of tightening up procedures in their school.
Yes, it's very important. I think there's certain things that we need to emphasize to facilities team, school keepers, when you get deliveries, and that happens to me here. You get delivery with chemicals, and Gary, your store team delivers chemicals in their boxes safely packaged and with normally with arrows, this way up, and then you get them there upside down. There is a reason why there is a sign on the box, because that probably contains concentrated sulfuric acid or any concentrated acid or flammable liquids, and then it gets delivered to you upside down. So I think there is a need to be sort of some consultation with the facilities team. Look, when we receive chemicals, do pay a bit more attention. Don't just chuck the boxes and throw them around. And then once they get delivered to you, um, the boxes need to open in a preparation room with enough space to be able to unpack the chemicals safely. And then once you unpack them, double check them through your delivery notes. Have you received the correct quantities from the supplier? Are there any to follow? So there are the procedures there. Once you have ticked that you've got the correct quantity and you don't need to notify your supplier, then you enter that chemical into your stock list before you put it into your chemical store. So it's that procedure of following, the supply, the unpacking, checking, and then recording into your stock control system.
That sounds good. And is it typically, do you only have to do this for secure your chemicals list stuff, or
No,
do you
no,
everything?
it's it's particularly more important for your secure your chemicals, but it should be done for all chemicals.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I mean the secure your chemicals is basically a list of about 20, 30 chemicals, and the reason is that these chemicals can be used for illicit purposes. It can be, made to produce explosives, is that kind of thing. That's why we need to sort of pay extra attention to these particular chemicals. Disposal. Again, many hazardous chemicals can still be a danger even when they have been used in the process, and all that is left is a residue. Or sometimes, some chemicals we can just, safely dilute and dispose down the drains or the foul sewage, but there are certain chemicals that we cannot. For one, very common use chemical in schools, even in very dilute form, is copper sulfate, and we cannot pour copper sulfate down the sinks or the foul sewage, is because it's harmful to the aquatic environment. So now, even this unwanted hazard chemicals, how do we store them before disposal? And again, they need to sort of store correctly in your chemical store until the disposal is organized. And a question that I get asked very often is how often you arrange a disposal service. Well, there is no sort of, time frame on that. It depends on the amount of chemicals waste that you have produced. If you have got a large quantity, and we need to be mindful on this, because chemical waste disposal is quite expensive. Therefore, you can't just keep doing it every month. We need to sort of, that's why I say you need to have a safe space in your chemical store, an external bin where you store your waste chemicals until you got a fair quantity that it makes it viable to arrange for your disposal. And this is kind of what we going back to. It's brilliant. It covers the Q&As here. So from the moment hazardous chemicals arrive at your school or college, you must be able to demonstrate full control of the chemical. and be able to account for it at all times until its use or final disposal. So this is what we kind of covered already. So having assessed what you have, how much you have, and where it is, you now need to take action to place controls in the three key areas, which they are the physical measures, the people, and the admin. And regardless, as we mentioned before, how good our physical security measures are, bad practices by staff members can result in doors not being locked. And we know that happens all the time. Hazardous materials being left in vulnerable places. The fewer people who have access to hazardous substances, the fewer people you will have to advise or train. So we minimize the number of people who have access to hazardous chemicals. For example, if you have who has access to your chemical store? Is it just you or the technician staff, or is it every teacher in the school? Or do external people have access to the store? Do cleaning personnel have access to your store? Is it because they use your chemical store as their cleaning cupboard as well? And I know that happens. So therefore you can use these an excuse to sort of have a proper chemical store that technician staff have only access to. And of course, we need to train staff accordingly.
Chris, can you use an expired chemical? Are there some you would, some you wouldn't, or you never would go with something that's past its sell-by date?
It's really interesting that, for a number of years, I never had the expiry date on our chemicals or my software. Like people kept asking, and I kind of added that. But really, we are not a research institution. We're educational. Do a quick test. If it works, it's absolutely fine to use. Now, having said that, there are certain chemicals, like things like enzymes, that will probably go off and you can't use them. Hydrogen peroxide, for example, if you kept it for a very long time, it would lose its strength. So there are a few chemicals, but as a general rule, in education establishment that we work, do a quick test. If it works, it's absolutely fine to use. Don't get rid of it because the expiry date. Oh, and it's an important thing to mention here, Gary. Expiry dates, and we all know that CLIEPS advises, for example, to decant nitric acid as soon as it arrives into the school from the plastic container into a glass bottle, and it's something that we should be doing because very often the reason for that is because very often the expiry date does not refer to the chemical, it may refer to the container. So plastic containers, they only have a limit time life, and therefore I've done a lot of training in Africa, in Ghana, and for example, because to the hot and humid environment, you pick up a bottle that's been there for 4 or 5 years and it just crumbles, so plastic deteriorates. Therefore, the expiry date may not refer to the chemical itself, but to the container. So bear that in mind.
So there's a couple more questions I'll quickly put your way. One's about some other CLEEPS advice, saying apparently chemicals cannot be moved between sites without following new transport regulations. That's not something I've heard about. I don't know if you've heard anything about that.
No, I mean, the transport regulations normally, it means if you're actually, are they referring to putting them in a car? Transport, it's by, if it's from one building to another within the school grounds, there is no problem unless you use the correct carriers to carry them safely, and you're taking all the necessary precautions. But I think the transport is transporting it by car. or by another means into another site.
Yeah, I think that would be what they meant. I mean, it's very much the same as I say, if you're going to the butcher's to get some hearts or something for the biology department, really you should have business insurance because it's kind of something you're doing for work. However, I know most
Yes.
people don't do it. They just pop there on their way to work or sometime during the day.
Yes, that's right. And I think it's worthwhile, referring to the clips. They have really great information there. So, and I think nearly every school in the country is a member of CLEAPS. And if you're not, I think it's a good justification to join CLEAPS because they provide, they're professionals. So they provide that information. So if you're unsure, do uh, consult CLEAPS, or you can email me and I'll give you my email address at the end, and they will be on the PowerPoint so you can have them, and I'm happy to respond to any questions. So administration, record keeping. Sorry, Gary, is there anything else?
No, keep going. There's a few other
Yeah,
things, but I'll try and answer them while you're talking.
right. Record keeping is a challenge for schools and colleges to be fully accountable so that they can clearly demonstrate what they're holding and is what quantities. So an audit trail must be included. What is delivered, as we said earlier, when it's delivered, where is the store, when it's used or disposed of, and when we dispose chemicals, the disposal company will give you a paper copy that what has been disposed, and you need to keep record of that. And the totals held in stock. It's really important to have record of your chemicals. So after a full stock check, you should now be in a position to answer the questions. Can you tell if anything is missing? If the answer is yes, you have completed this task successfully. And again, if it's what we said at the beginning, if the answer is no, more work is required to be done. So I've got on the slide here, there's a link that you can, or this it's on the CLEAPS website. So as you can see there, you can search for secure your chemicals and you click on the link and you'll be able to have the full guidance, which gives the list of chemicals. And there is a small assessment tool at the end. Is where to find this assessment tool again, and it's kind of it's a really useful tool where we can actually how we do a daily, a weekly, a termly assessment of our chemicals. And if I actually go back and I can, Gary, you told me if it comes on, I may need to share another screen. I wanted to open the guidance. Is the guidance in view, or is it a PowerPoint still?
It's your PowerPoint still.
Yes, I thought it might be a case. Let me just stop the share. So I'm going to stop sharing there, and I'm going to share again.
I know you can't monitor the chat while you're talking, Chris, but I have to say it's been quite funny. It's been a lot of funny comments and anecdotal stories from people. Some people never seen a risk assessment before. Some people using a chemical with a date of 1973 on it.
Yeah. Is the guidance now on view?
It says list of chemicals causing most concern. Yeah. Okay.
And this is what this is the full secure your chemicals guidance, and that's why I didn't want to sort of on the slides. I thought it would be best just to snip some of those information rather than just making them straight from the guidance. So this is the full guidance again. It's worthwhile. Now you got the link, download the guidance, have a little read about the current registration, the management, again, accountability. And this is what we kind of discussed. And I wanted just to go briefly on, because I'm sure people will want to know which chemicals are we talking about. and the secure your chemicals is those chemicals causing most concern because they can be used for illicit purposes, especially making explosives, that kind of thing. And we have ethanoic, acetic acid, acetone, alcohols, all the nitrates and the chlorates, they're on the list. But some things like citric acid, you wouldn't think it would be in there, but yes, and even things like glycerin, hydrogen peroxide again, and then the nitrates. And so this is the full list on there. So what the guidance basically says, when you put out these chemicals in a class, make sure you collect as many balls as you put out back. So you accountability of what you have put out, and you retrieve back in. Obviously, some of the chemicals that have been used, that's why you put them out. That's absolutely fine. Basically, we don't want any of those chemicals disappearing. So, right, let me stop sharing that. And if I go back to my PowerPoint, and is the PowerPoint now on, Gary?
Sorry, my microphone was off. It is, but it's the small screen type where you
Yeah,
can see your
let me
notes.
just yeah, I'll change that. Is there display settings, presenters? Yeah.
Yes, it's back to being good again.
So, where to get some support? We all mentioned CLEIPS, Health and Safety Executive, Association of Science Education, Institute of Science and Technology, Institute of Physics, Royal Society of Chemistry. From myself, all good information there. Couple of screenshots of the Labexpert software here. This is the chemicals. And again, one of the things that we have in our 20-year anniversary edition, we have included, well, it did include the secure your chemicals list. So we can see the hydrogen peroxide 100 volume. We've seen it on the list, and therefore it's ticked, and therefore it's there. So when you search for the chemical, it comes up. And we know it's now under the EPP list. And I had to do that yesterday when I ordered something from Gary. I got, I think it was some corn hydrochloric acid. I had to sort of produce some information, photo ID, and I know there are some concerns about people who says, "Oh, I don't want to produce my photo ID," but you can, your college or your school photo ID is acceptable. So that's what I sent yesterday. So that's acceptable. So bear in mind. So yeah, again, we covered the software in the last seminar. If you went there, again, one of the things, you can add chemicals, you can enter how much you have used. It automatically tells you the quantity you have used, but you can visit the website and see the chemicals or send me a query. I don't want to sort of spend a lot of time advertising chemicals. And there is one for equipment also. Again, as important as chemicals, keeping track of all equipment and inventory system. So that's also available. And I also wanted to sort of highlight an event that both Gary and myself will be at, the whole SLS team. This will be the third year I'm running a technicians conference at the college here in London. It's the Capital City College STEM Technicians Conference. It's on the 11th of July. We are only charging £65, and there will be 24 workshops to choose from. And there will be 3 workshops during the day. It will be a full conference with exhibitors like SLS and all the other scientific suppliers, but also the Institute of Physics, the Institute of Biology, Royal Society of Chemistry, and many others. So it's normally a a fantastic day. So that's happening on the 11th of July, if you're interested. And lastly, my contact details, you got my mobile there, and also it's chris@labexpert.co.uk.